I was thinking about the ways how I would be starting this particular meeting. So why not start about with the word sustainability? So what do we mean about the word sustainability? Now, a major bank had done a survey of more than 5,000 individuals. James also talked about that in the book, that while surveying these individuals, most of them shared that they are not very familiar or are confused by the terminology of what sustainability means. Now, I will leave that explanation of what sustainability means and what sustainability investments mean in particular to James later in the conversation. But from a quick search on the web and after reading the book also, what I got to know about just the word sustainability is in a very simple layman terms is basically consuming what you need and leaving the rest for the future. Now, in a very simple terms, it could mean like you get a mango, you eat the mango, you have the seed, you plant the seed, then you get a tree from it, and the generations go on. This particular book is basically one of those Mars rover Curiosity, which we sent on Mars, right? That basically to tell us about that. Not a lot of people are familiar about sustainable investment. Not a, I mean, rightly so. Those 5,000 individuals, I feel for them that there is so much not clear definitions around this topic, not so many books written on the topic. So that is why this particular book, Sustainable Investments in Practice, ESG Challenges and Opportunities by Simon Smiles and James Purcell is very important. And that is why the job which James Purcell does is very important to have these conversations, because we need these conversations on multiple platforms, happening in multiple intensity, happening in multiple boardrooms, in multiple living rooms. We need these conversations going on, because at the end of the day, I also want my daughters 20, 30 years down the line also having that particular mango. So that is that. More and more investors, regulators, governments, suppliers, and and others major institutions are playing a very, very important critical role in defining this space of sustainable investments, this space of ESG, which is environmental, social, and governance. Basically, collectively, we are understanding and defining these practices, which we can package together as sustainability. Now, we are starting to see these conversations around sustainability getting a little bit more attention than what it was 5 years back, or what it was 10 years back, or should I say 20 years back. There was not even a word called as sustainability, and now how it has evolved over a period of time, and we'll talk about James more on that. But we have a long way to go on this sustainable finance journey. So that is why books like such are very important to write, and more so are very important to be read, and even more so important, more to be discussed. So that is what we are trying to do today. And the good news is that there are a lot of discussions underway like today's, and we hope to see that sustainability having a much greater focus in the markets, in our lives, and being used alongside traditional investment. So at one point in time, there might not be a sustainable investment or a traditional investment. It is how we would invest. It is just the way it would be. Now, one of my favorite thoughts of all times is that you cannot see what you don't know. And human eye cannot see what it doesn't know, and how James mentions and quotes in his book by James Drucker, if I Peter Drucker, that you cannot you cannot manage what you cannot measure. Investments is all about management, the portfolio, and if we cannot manage them, and if we cannot measure them, if we don't have these frameworks defined internationally, if these frameworks are not being acceptable by various financial institutions, various organizations, various countries, and various individuals, how would we collectively bring them together and manage them? So that is why these conversations are very important, like I repeatedly said. That is why people like James are very important, and books like Sustainability Investment in Practice, ESG Challenges and Practices is very, very important. Now, first we do is that we identify the topic, and then we identify the person. But so who is James? James is an author, He's a dad, he's a lecturer, he's a sustainable finance practitioner. He's from United Kingdom, but his work and studies have taken him across the globe from London to Hong Kong to Zurich. James graduated from University of Oxford with a BA honors in modern history and graduated from University of Chicago Booth of School of Business with the MBA high honors. He lives in Zurich in Switzerland with his young son. So if you don't find him in boardrooms discussing sustainable finance practices, he would be mostly paddling board with his son, or spending the winters in the mountains. So, on behalf of the Words Book Club, I humbly, and all the guests and all the people who would be listening to the podcast later, I humbly welcome you, James.
Thank you very much. I really do appreciate that very kind and warm welcome.
Thank you so much, James. I mean, we need books like these because more and more people, while they are pursuing studies, while they are in colleges, or while they are pursuing their careers, they need. And I always say, I mean, it's good to read an article on sustainable investment. I mean, it's good, right? I mean, you read, but you have to put everything together. So that's why books are important. That's why I have stopped reading articles a long time ago. That if you really want to understand a topic, you have to go about the book way, because it brings together a lot of things. Now, but why should we care about sustainable investments? Why, as individuals or organizations or communities and countries, why should we care about sustainable finance? Let's take an example. Climate change, extreme climate events across the world. Like right now, I mean, is a thunderstorm going on in Singapore right now, and it's raining. So it brings us to this point of climate change across the world. They have high, I mean, something which happened in Pakistan also, floods, people displacing here and there, and water is a very uh, precious, or should I say particular topic, especially in Asia. That extreme events across the world have heightened the importance of water as a strategic global resources. I may not quote, but I am very, very sure that water is one of the strategic priorities and is getting discussed in the boardrooms of countries. I'm not even saying companies, boardrooms of countries. It's such a strategic global importance source. Now, if and in a climate event whereby these severe weather patterns is likely to continue across the globe, and it affects populations, it affects water resources, water, we may come up with a water stress scenario whereby it may get increasingly strategic for policymakers to tap on these resources, and how companies are consuming it, how communities are consuming it, and the world needs to adapt to strategic water consumption, and more awareness on this particular topic. Not only companies, but even countries and more policymakers need to come to this. And the water is just one of those topics in a vast array of natural resources, and the list is quite long. So, like I said, like I started the meeting with, like, we have to have the mango, but let's keep the seed and plant it for the future. So we do need water, but let's use it wisely to make it sure it is available for future. Let's how resources are consumed by organizations across the world, let's make it more sustainable, so that the future generations can also see and enjoy what we are able to enjoy. James' sons and my daughter, they definitely are aspiring when they are out of college. They want to see Europe in its best beauty. They want to see the rice fields of Bali. They want to go and see the beautiful mountains of Pakistan and India. And why not so? So it is our job to have these conversations repeatedly, so that it gets into the decision making, it right, so that our future generation can enjoy these. So how we can do that, by having a good understanding on this topic. And rightly so, the book Sustainable Investment in Practice, ESG Challenges and Opportunities by Simon Smiles and James Purcell come into the picture. The book is a fantastic read. I suggest you keep aside 2 weeks at the end of the December or any time in the year for going through the book. It will take you approximately around 2 weeks to have a good understanding. I mean, You can also finish it in the weekend, but it is not a fictional thriller. It is a topic which you want to get a good understanding of. So I'll suggest 2 weeks, and that also, like 1 hour every night before going to the bed. You go through it. It has fantastic topics to start from, basically defining what is sustainable investing, how ESG comes into the picture, what is public equity markets, what is United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. It go and then concludes and brings everything together. Like I said, it's not an article; it's a book. It brings everything together. Now, I know you don't. Without further ado, I would now invite James to share his thoughts about the book, the process, the ideas, everything about it. Over to you, James.
Thank you very much. So again, a pleasure to be with you here today for your listeners today, and those that I know do very much enjoy your podcast as well. So I guess the germination of this book was relatively straightforward. It was myself and my good friend and former colleague, Simon Smiles. The two of us had built one of the most successful sustainable investing offerings at a major financial firm. And we wanted to try and translate some of those experiences into a format that could be digested by others and hopefully prove useful as others sought to replicate this in various different offshoots around the world. And we tried a few different things. We wrote op-eds for numerous newspapers. We did some videos and so forth. And like you said earlier, it didn't really create the holistic approach that we were looking for. And thus the idea of the book came about. So what the book does is it tries to frame sustainability in the most accessible way possible. It's littered with an array of analogies, pop culture references, and other ways to try and make what can be a complex topic, what can be a topic full of jargon, accessible to the widest possible audience. And as you mentioned, we've tried to structure it in a way that is also got a degree of sensibility behind it. So we start off with the big topic, which is what is sustainable investing? Always good to start there. And we move through the various asset classes. So we talk about public equity, public debt, we talk about private markets and so forth. And we finish really trying to bring it together, some of the lessons that we've learned through our time working in the industry. A lot of it is to do with topics such as incentives and people's motivations to try and bring people with us on this journey rather than shouting from the outside. So it's been an awful lot of fun writing it. We published it in January of this year. So it's almost coming up to its first birthday. On the back of it, I run a university course, which, as I said, draws heavily on the material. And as I said, we found it's translated well into that format as well.
Yeah, fantastic. Like I said, sitting at the comfort of individual's home, you can buy this book in December, go through it, and you're as good as doing a course in a university, where by having a cup of coffee or a hot chocolate, whatever you prefer, and going through the thoughts of James and Simons, and how this process built up. And first thing first, like you start the book also, let's start with the same topic. What is sustainable investment? What is sustainable investing, and how does it different from traditional investment? And is there an opportunity for an investor there?
So it's a wonderful question, and in some ways it's almost a bit of a depressing question, which is sustainable investment has been around for multiple decades. We can trace its lineage literally back hundreds of years if we so choose, but we can certainly have a very firm understanding of sustainability over the past, say, 3 decades. And the fact that we sit here today and you ask a completely legitimate question, what is sustainability, does show that perhaps we haven't done the best job of communicating what sustainable investing is and what it's trying to achieve. And throughout that time, or one of the things that Simon and I kind of observe, is that people routinely, when faced with that challenge of trying to communicate what this is, try to redefine it again. And you end up with this situation where you can have hundreds upon hundreds of terminology, hundreds upon hundreds of definitions building up on each other. And each one is trying to do the right thing and define sustainable investment in the best way possible. But what it does inadvertently create is a great deal of confusion because you have, as I said, these terms and these definitions that are similar but not precisely the same. So it's a wonderful question, but it's also a question that, as I said, that is slightly hard to answer, and it contains within it one of sustainability's greatest problems. Generally speaking, where do these definitions and where do these approaches tend to circle around with different nuances? It really circles around the idea of non-financial factors that can have a material and significant impact either on different stakeholders, so that can be communities, it can be employees, or the value of the company itself. So it's all about understanding how non-financial factors, often grouped, as you said earlier, under environmental, social, and governance pillars, have an impact, be it on financials or stakeholders. So to answer your second question, which was, how does it differ from traditional investing? I think the best way to answer that is to say that it doesn't. It differs in so much that a value investor, made famous Warren Buffett, of course, is different from a generalist investor or from a growth investor. People are looking at the same information. They're looking at, broadly speaking, the same techniques, but they place different emphasis and different weight on different things. So I don't think we should view sustainable investing as something that is outside of the financial system. I don't think we should view it as something that is aspirational and difficult to achieve. I think we should view it as part of an ecosystem, and within that, as I said, a philosophy and approach that is valid as an investment technique and is simply a different prioritization of well-established and generally accepted ideas.
Yeah, I mean, you basically touch upon very, very important points, that there should not be actually a difference between a traditional investment and a sustainable investment. So the goal is, by this book and by these conversations and many, many, many more, so that at the end of whatever the journey is, that we don't see the difference, because that is the way to invest. You always invest sustainability. You always consider impact in your investments, or in whatever you're trying to do in your respective jobs, as individuals, countries, organizations. Now, while we are on this topic, let's explore it a little bit more, James. And being in Oxford, being in Chicago Booth, really studying traditional finance, and after college, you have had these conversations with multiple people on impact investments. Now, I want to hear, and maybe the book club also wants to hear, that how has these conversations evolved over a period of time? When you started your college, or how people were looking at it at that point in time in 2015. Should I consider, tell it as pre-COVID, and during COVID and after COVID? How has the conversation around impact investment or sustainable investment changed?
So I think the biggest change has been a tonal shift from a relatively negative view of sustainability to a more positive view. And by that I mean, a lot of the focus several years ago was on what you can't do, that you shouldn't invest in X, and what was the risk of your portfolio. So they're quite negative concepts. They were telling you what you shouldn't do, and they were trying to monitor what could go wrong. And I think increasingly where the conversation has gone to is this more positive tone. And the positive tone is, how can companies and other stakeholders benefit from some of these trends? How can we make the world better for investments? So when we think about this kind of rise of impact investments, as you reference, it's really about creating intentional and measurable change for the investments. It's a concept that is really rooted in, I don't just want my investments to manage environmental, social, and governance risks, or I don't just want them to reflect my values. I want there to be a direct linkage between me putting money to work and better things happening in the world. And that's really been the tonal shift, I think, which is the ambition level has been raised. The tone has shifted from negative to positive. And that, I think, is a wonderful thing when we think about affecting change and actually, as I said, making progress on the many challenges that we collectively face today.
Yeah, I mean, I'm big fan of having these conversation and propagating these ideas across, because I speak for the children of future, right? I want to have these parks and water reservoirs and glaciers available for the next generation to see and enjoy. And rightly so, investors more and more in today's time are getting aware of that. They are, like you rightly said, and it makes so much sense that they want to see their money not only from the angle of ESG, but also seeing like you the word using a word, direct linkage between what they are investing and a positive outcome. So I think that is really fantastic. I started this topic by saying that, what eyes cannot see, what mind doesn't know, the eyes cannot see, and you cannot manage what you cannot measure. So how do we measure and report impact of these sustainable investments, and how are these organizations and investments being measured, and I mean, tell us more about it, how your journey while writing the book and being a finance professional, how has these conversations evolved?
Yeah, so much like the definition of sustainable investing itself, there is countless ways that people have devised to try and measure sustainability and whether investments are having a positive impact on the world or not. And one of the reasons why there are so many frameworks and so many approaches out there is because it's incredibly hard to do it well. And therefore, people are seeing that as a problem and attempting to rectify it by creating a new framework, creating a new set of data disclosures and so forth. And that's, as we mentioned earlier, is very well intentioned, but in reality, it's a form of additive bias, where all of us, when faced with problems, we have a tendency to add rather than to subtract. So in our work lives, when we're faced with problems, often what you end up with is a new policy being created or another committee being added to the chain, when quite often the opposite is what's required. We actually need to strip things back. So, as I said, I think there is literally countless ways and countless different organizations that are either collaborating or competing to create measurement frameworks for sustainability and impact. So what I'll do instead of naming my favorites, which is obviously what I could do, is really talk about what they're all trying to achieve. And what they're trying to achieve is they're trying to understand what is material, what is relevant, and they're looking to see whether that is relevant from a financial perspective, i.e. are these factors that we're measuring going to impact the value of our bonds and equities? Or they're looking at, are these things relevant and material to the wider world, to stakeholders, to people and planet? And people get very agitated in the sustainable investing industry about the difference between those. Should we be measuring what impacts the companies, or should we be measuring how the companies impact the world? There's an awful lot of debate occurring on that, and all of these frameworks, all of these approaches are circling around that same issue. I think one of the things that we need to do when we have this data is to be humble about it, which is even many of these things are almost by requirement going to be estimates, as it were. So we talk about carbon emissions, we talk about carbon emissions in tons, where you can get very precise figures these days for companies of how much carbon they emit. But we have to acknowledge that these things are built on models, they're built on estimates. So there's a humility that's required to all of this, which is to make sure that we establish to the best of our ability some of these factors. But it's extraordinarily difficult to measure many of these elements, and thus a humility is required. And we need to make sure, we don't get lost in numbers. As financial people, we tend to want to try and quantify things, but there is a limitation to that. And thus, as I said, with all these frameworks, there is a degree of caution that needs to be required with them.
No, I think that is fantastic. That if we are approaching something, knowing and clearly defining it, that there are a set of assumptions put into place in that particular model, that is I think a right step towards understanding these ratings and understanding these measurement tools, and how we go about playing that into understanding and really deciding on investment. So I think that is fantastic. For an investor now, let's talk about different asset classes. For an impact investment investor now, uh, what role sustainable investments can play, or what role can an impact investor play in private versus public listed organizations, right? These are two different classes, have different data availability, if you say. Then how are these two asset classes different from each other from an sustainable investment point of view?
Sure. So I guess the first thing to establish is how public markets work. So publicly listed companies are, many of the companies that we know and love are Apples, or Unilevers, or Teslas, etc.
Yeah.
And I think the critical thing to understand is when you purchase a share in any of those companies, no money goes to the company itself. Those shares are finite in number. They were issued many years ago. You are simply exchanging your money for a share with another investor. So it's very much like if you and I today were entering into a transaction, I could give you some of my shares, you'd give me some money, and that would happen essentially in isolation. It wouldn't impact the companies in question. So in the public markets, when you scale this up, you can in effect sell, if you will, all the supposedly unsustainable companies, depending upon your definition of unsustainable. But let's say they're highly carbon intensive, for example, and you can buy all the sustainable companies that you've defined, and nothing actually changes. Your portfolio may be decarbonized, or your portfolio may look sustainable on any given metrics, but the real world hasn't changed. So when it comes to public markets, your ability to have genuine real world impact to affect change is relatively limited. And the prevailing theory that is out there is the best way to have change in public markets is by using your voice as a owner of capital. So rather than avoiding the companies that think are unsustainable, actually, perhaps counterintuitively, doing the opposite, acquiring more of them. If you are an equity holder, you are a part owner of that company, however small, and that affords you certain legal rights. It certainly affords you a voice. Thus, in public markets, the prevailing approach is actually quite surprising. It asks you to move into less sustainable companies and then use that position of influence for the greater good. If you contrast that with private markets, so most times in private markets, when you make a private market investment, you're not dealing with another investor. You are actually putting money to work with the company itself. And therefore, generally speaking, private markets have far greater potential for real world change, because through your investment, you can help companies and services grow, you can help them thrive, be it buying more machines, hiring new employees, reaching new markets. And thus, of course, you can shape the real economy through that activity. Now, there's a huge amount of nuance around both of those areas, of course, and again, people will debate and argue and fight each other over some of those statements. But to broadly kind of summarize and perhaps overly simplify, you can either change the behavior of companies, which is what people try to do in public markets, or you can change the amount of capital companies have, which is what people try and do in private markets.
No, I think this is really, really fantastic, and thank you for really putting a light into these two asset classes and how investors can play an active role in both of these investments, right? And I think you have played a fantastic picture of how investors in both of these, not shunning it back, but being a step forward and being actively involved in these conversations. And from the start of this session, I think one thing which we have been saying continuously is having these conversations, continuously having these conversations on different platforms, different boardrooms, different coffee shops, living rooms, everywhere need to have these conversations. We want the kids to have mangoes in the future. So that is, and glaciers to enjoy. That is the aim. Now, for all the people who have joined us graciously today, close to around 50 people, I encourage you all to start thinking about the points about sustainable investments, about the book, or anything which you want to ask to James. In fact, how's life in Zurich? Start thinking about those questions right now. So we will go into the rapid fire questions now, and after the rapid fire round, you will get an opportunity to engage with James directly, right? So, James, are you ready for the author for the rapid fire round?
Uh, by all means, sure.
By all means, yeah. I like the spirit. I like the spirit. Okay, here we go. What are the biggest learning experience? Which is the one biggest learning experience you have had?
I think I have learned over the last few years that trying to help other people achieve their aims is substantially easier and more effective than always pursuing your own objectives. People are obviously incentivized to fulfill their own objectives, and therefore it is a lot easier and often a lot more beneficial to help them rather than always try and push your own agenda. And I think people tend to be a little bit self-centered and forget that helping others can be more advantageous for everyone.
James, I love you for saying that. Absolutely. I mean, heart shape. Absolutely fantastic. I mean, I was not expecting that, but wonderful. What is that cause that is very important to you?
Education.
Love it. My appreciation and love for you is increasing by the questions we are progressing. So third question: ocean or glaciers?
So I grew up by the sea, but obviously I now live in Switzerland that has no sea, but it does have glaciers. I think I still do long for the ocean. I absolutely love vast expanses of water. I'm lucky I live by a lake here in Switzerland, but nothing beats crashing waves in the ocean. It's magical.
Exactly. It's fantastic. I completely agree with you. Now let's get to know you a little bit more. What's your childhood nickname?
I guess highly unoriginal from my childhood friends. They called me by my surname quite a lot, Purcell.
Okay.
Occasionally they shortened it to Percy, which was frustrating and not optimal. But that was probably the most common ones that were polite.
Interesting, fantastic. So, if it would be one sport and you have to compete in Olympics with that, which would it be?
I think there's a good reason why I don't compete in the Olympics. I feel like it'd be most enjoyable to do a relatively minor sport. That would be kind of, very much a talking point in conversation. So I don't know if synchronized swimming or something is available in the Olympics. I feel like that's going to be more interesting than saying that you were, a track and field athlete. So
correct.
I'd go with something quirky.
Fantastic, love it. So if you have to be a superhero, what would be your name?
Something to do with invisibility. I'm naturally relatively shy and introverted, so I don't know what the name would be, but something to do with invisibility.
Fantastic. So I think I asked this question in the beginning of the session also, but for the investors and listeners, which book are you reading right now?
I am reading What If by Randall Munroe. What If is a fantastic book. He's also got a great blog. Essentially, he sources scientific questions from his audience, and then he answers them in a fun way. So, for example, one of the questions that he gets asked is, with the population of New York, how many Tyrannosaurus rexes could the population of New York sustain? And obviously he goes into the maths behind how much calories Tyrannosauruses need, how much people there are, what's the birth rate of New York in terms of replenishment, etc., to come up with a range of different answers to somewhat silly questions. So it's silly questions with serious answers. He does a wonderful job.
I like having young kids. I think this is a fascinating read. I'm going to pick it up for December. And moving on, if time travel would be possible, where would you go?
I would go towards the future, I guess. I generally believe, even despite of some of the challenges that we're familiar, especially environmental, that as we move forward, things get better in terms of standards of living and civilization, if you will, in terms of how we treat each other. So I guess I would go forward in time rather than backwards.
Fantastic.
That trends are positive.
Yes, of course. We are hoping towards it. That's why we are having this conversation, to have a very positive future. So, sweet, salty, or sour?
Salty.
Fantastic. So if you get a chance to have a dinner with any human being on the planet right now, who would you choose?
I'd probably go straight to the top. Why not Biden? That'd be fun, wouldn't it? If you're going to have your one dinner, you might as well go for at least in theory, the most powerful man in the world.
Fantastic. I mean, I think that were all the 10 questions, and you did very fantastically well, James. I'm like I said, with every question, my love for you and appreciation has been increasing incrementally. So that was James Purcell in rapid fire round, everyone. So like I said in the beginning, you will get a chance to ask questions and engage with James right now. So if you have any questions, please unmute yourself and fire away. Yeah, Prajakta. And I think we have one more. Yeah, Olga.
Thank you. Should I start?
Please go ahead.
The camera is here. Thank you very much, James, for your presentation today. My question is not about sustainable investing, it's about writing a book. Could you please share your biggest learning points or anything you would recommend to a person who would like even to think about starting to write a book? Like, what was your experience?
So the first one is to write non-fiction rather than fiction. And the reason why is in the publishing industry, fiction, generally you have to write the entire book and then you submit it via agents. Non-fiction, you can write proposals, i.e. a couple of pages. So the kind of risk reward is so much better with non-fiction compared to fiction. And yeah, you can ease into it, that's for sure. I guess the other thing I would say is the publisher you work with absolutely matters in terms of what kind of support that you get from them. Our publisher was really good, especially in the early stages, in helping us rework our proposal and our framework and so forth. They were less good when it came to like copy editing. They would do editing around, as I said, kind of grammatical errors and so forth. But we actually brought in a very good friend of mine to help us with the language and the formulation. Like, even as native English speakers, our grammar's not perfect, our syntax isn't great, the pace at which we write at, the cadence can all be improved. So we brought in a very good friend of ours to improve that. But in other cases, that's kind of done for you. So I think the support around it is really, really crucial. And as I said, for the most part, we were very fortunate. But there was a couple of things that, had I known more about writing a book, I would have asked up front to make sure that was part of our deal.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, James. Thank you, Olga, for asking. Is Prajakta, please unmute yourself and.
Hi, James, and thank you, Paris, for arranging this. It's a great honor to have James on the board.
Yeah.
So, James, the question, I mean, it's kind of a rapid fire question only. Like, what is the best investment for you so far, and what you would advise as a retail investor?
So I would say the best investment that I've ever made is non-financial. It's been around, as I mentioned earlier, education. And there are definitely times when I wish I'd made more of some of my educational experiences where I perhaps wasn't quite as committed as I could or should have been. From a financial perspective, as I said, I think it's a little bit dull, but it is around diversification. Which is, I have many friends who have either been highly successful or ruinously unsuccessful in their investment approaches, where they've, as I said, taking a very concentrated bet on a couple of companies, be they public or private. And me, as someone who's slightly risk adverse, I've said, the diversification of having, globally diversified portfolios certainly has proven to me to be something that I have benefited from. And then I think from a kind of thematic perspective, when we look forward, a lot of my time at the minute is spent around biodiversity and natural capital. A lot has been discussed around climate, of course. That's really been the mega theme of the last, say, 10 years. I do see that focus shifting into, as I said, a broader natural capital biodiversity type nexus. So certainly the last few months, I've been going deep into that world. And I do believe that there's an awful lot of need for money there, but also, of course, potential from an investment point of view as well.
Okay, thanks a lot, James. Thank you.
Thank you, Prajakta. Thank you, James. Any further questions from the audience? I think we have Nidhi and Amit. So Nidhi, you go first.
Hello, James. Thanks, Parins, for arranging this, and thanks, James, for summarizing it so beautifully for us. My question was that when we go or look for any sustainable product, how do we ensure there's no greenwashing associated, or it's not a fake investment, so which is being claimed as sustainable?
I think it's incredibly difficult to do, and one of the reasons is that greenwashing is, in some cases, a function of a viewpoint rather than being deliberately misleading. So, for example, if one investor was to build a portfolio of the most sustainable companies in every individual sector, you'd end up with the best company from a sustainability point of view in oil and gas, in mining, in financials, and so forth. And another investor might look at that portfolio and get very upset because it's got, as I said, in energy and mining companies in it. So you can have the situation where people or newspapers or companies are accusing others of greenwashing, when what's actually occurring is a different approach to sustainability. So I think the best thing to do as an individual is to define what you're looking for when it comes to sustainability. Are you looking for companies that have products and services that are trying to help solve the world's problems? Are you looking for companies that are well managed from an environmental, social, governance point of view? Are you looking at a very narrow niche, like companies with a small carbon footprint or fantastic gender diversity? So I think the best thing to do as an individual is to define what sustainability means to you, and then use that as your barometer going forward. And as long as it's not too niche, broadly speaking, if you're focusing on either governance, products and services, climate, or gender, the information's pretty accessible these days to allow you to make decisions on high-level verticals like that.
Yeah.
Thank you, James.
Thank you, James. I think we have two questions, one from David and one from Amit. So maybe David, you can unmute yourself and fire across.
Thank you very much, James, for that interesting topic for the whole, which is very important in our time. Do we have a chance to read it in German, your book?
It's sadly not. So the Japanese translation is coming out middle of next year. That's the first translation that's been picked up. I haven't yet sold it to a German publishing house. So unfortunately, German's going to have to wait a little bit longer. We shall see. I do teach, as I said, I teach my course in Germany, so it's not beyond the possibility that one would be the next one to come out. But a lot of it, as I said, basically just depends on demand. If it sells enough, then people start picking it up in different countries. But unfortunately, German's not yet coming. But if you're into Japanese, you've only got another 6 months to wait.
I will try it. Thanks.
Thank you, David. Amit?
Yeah, basically my question was, I think somebody already asked greenwashing, but let's say there is a climate conference right now going on in, in Dubai, I guess.
Yeah.
So look, I think this topic has been, and I think I think there is a talk we are going to miss the 1.5% target. There is a big concern. But what do you think? I think the topic has gained enough attention that everybody talks about it. Just going, when do you think this become urgent enough that we have to really take action? And would there be like new trends coming in, which we can probably already can see, from an investing perspective?
It's a really, really good question, and especially on the topic of climate, which of course is only one part of sustainability, but an important one. A lot of my community is beginning to move to the viewpoint that you hold, which is our attempts at mitigation and avoiding these unpleasant scenarios are very close to failure, and therefore they're moving their thought process to adaptation. So how do we actually deal with these horrible consequences? So a lot of us said my broader network from the investment perspective, the venture capital guys, that's where they're heading. And that is, on the one hand, worrying. On the other hand, the adaptation part might have a long enough runway that we actually stand half a chance to get the funding and the technologies and the approaches in place. So it's, when does this all kick in? It kicks in when people feel it directly. There is, direct correlations between when natural disasters happen and legislation comes out in a supportive manner. So unfortunately, people, generally speaking, they have to feel something directly and in a meaningful way before they act. Hence, as I said, it does seem like we're behind on many of these targets. If we, consult the UN Sustainable Development Goals, or as you referenced, some of the climate trajectories. Hence, as I said, many people are beginning to look beyond the, can we change the path to, what do we do when we end up in a bad place?
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Amit, for that very interesting question, and thank you, James, for bringing our perspective towards that. It is, I don't think there are any further questions from the audience. If there is, I think there's one more from Alice. Otherwise, I would have asked one, but Alice, you go ahead.
Yeah, hi, James. Really, really interesting. Thanks for doing this. Is there going to be a sequel?
Sequel to the book? Possibly. Yeah, I've got one idea that I am currently playing with, which is similar to what I described earlier from Randall Munroe, as I said, who takes on interesting questions with a kind of a scientific approach. I am tempted to do something similar around sustainability. So trying to make something that's really, really accessible to people, to kind of do a combination of kind of myth busting and very basic kind of education that I think could be really, really powerful. So there's simple ideas, things like which sources of energies have historically caused the most damage or deaths, and people think it's nuclear, but of course in reality it's not. There's ways of kind of shining a light on some of these things where I think you can get some great intuitive comparables around many of these topics. So I'm debating whether to go in that direction right now. Just last week I was with my editor from the first book, and we were talking it over. So the answer is maybe.
Fantastic.
Right.
No, I think that was a very, very important question. And while you were answering that, James, it just came to me, and I'm just thinking out loud here. I think you should also consider writing about children book. What I mean by that, pre-teens, maybe a textbook. Who knows? Because I think if we are going to pass on the world to them, they should know how to take care of it much better than what we are doing right now. So good financial book, good, which also gives them an understanding of the financial world, and also a good understanding of sustainable investment topics. I, as a parent, would be very interested to buy that book for my girls, and rightly so, because it's a very important topic. So I think before I move on to my final question, any last questions from the audience? I know that you have a lot, but we are bound by the time. Just 8 minutes left. Okay, if not, then my final question, James, is something which I was holding back for the very climax. Is basically how you end your book also, and explore this topic. Like I said, articles are fine, podcasts are fine, but you need a book to bring it all together. And thank you so much for writing the fantastically well-written book, Sustainable Investment: Investing in Practice, ESG Challenges and Practices by Simon Smiles and James Purcell. Thank you so much for writing this book, and this conclusion which you bring towards the end of your very well written book is how we might get there. Your thoughts on this, please, before we split.
Yeah, so I guess at the back of the book, Simon and I talk through kind of our three biggest lessons that we've picked up, and to get there, all of those need to be addressed, I would say. So the first is that when it comes to sustainability, what people say and what they do are entirely different things. So if you run surveys on whether people want to invest sustainably or buy sustainable products, everyone says yes, and then they don't do it. And therefore you can very easily be misled and fall over if you're trying to launch products and services, be they financial or real economy, based upon what people are saying. You really need to look at what people are doing. So that's a massive gap between what people say and what people do, and confronting that head on, and not having the confirmation bias of hearing what you want to hear is crucially important. The second big learning that Simon and I have taken away is what we refer to as the mass middle, which is there is a very small proportion of people who are truly believers in sustainability and who will go out of their way to either live sustainably or invest sustainably. There's another small proportion who are at the opposite end of the spectrum and actively dislike it. And then there's this giant mass in the middle of, be it consumers or investors, who are willing to adopt this if it's presented to them in a compelling manner, if it's price competitive, if it's engaging, if there's a narrative, etc., and so forth. And a lot of what the sustainable community often does is it speaks to the true believers in a bit of an echo chamber, when in reality what we need to do is open this up, democratize it, and really target, as I said, that giant mass middle that could come with us on the journey if we get everything else right. As I said, I think that's a key learning. And then the third one we touched on very briefly before, which is the power of incentives, the power of creating mutual win-wins. Very rarely, and you'll know this from obviously your parenting, you don't get very far by shouting at people. You don't really get very far by telling people what they can't do, by berating them, by saying they're making poor choices. You get far further when you work with people, when you understand what their incentives are, what their needs are, and you try and build solutions that reflect those needs. So I'm a huge believer in as I said, in creating mutually beneficial scenarios, creating win-wins. So to get there, as I said, there's an awful lot to do, but those would be my big three, which is understand the gap between intention and action, really engage with the mass middle who could go either way on these topics and products debates, and then create, as I said, mutually beneficial win-win scenarios wherever possible.
Wow, fantastic. I think that just brings everything to a very nice picture which you portrayed there, James. And rightly so, we should be engaging in all those conversations and taking iterative steps towards a sustainable future for our kids and next generation. And I think I speak it on behalf of all the members present here today from the Words Book Club, as well as so many people who would be interested in this topic and would listen to the podcast or watch the video. I think this is an absolutely fantastically well-written book on sustainable finance. And like I said, there are articles, there is so much of noise out there which needs to be collated and filtered and put well together in a academic fashion, if I have to say, because this is at the end of the day a very academic topic. And I think I congratulate you and Simons both for a very well written book, and wishing you all the future success with the book and the sales, and also with the sequel, and so many good things. Yeah, wishing in your life, because I think you are on the forefront of this very very important topic. Like I said, unfortunately, until people confront a climate crisis in their lives or have a direct impact, they may not think about it. But I think we might need to be a little bit more wiser, and think about it from now. It's not necessary that we incur a problem and start thinking about the solution. We have to start thinking about the solution right now, not only in Dubai. I mean, that is fantastic that we are doing it, but I think across the world, from boardrooms to living rooms, everywhere across. And thank you. And the book and your conversations across platforms brings that material and support structure to students, to investors, to housewives, for that matter, to bring this topic accessible to everyone. So thank you so much, James, for writing this book, and really really appreciate your time today also.
That's very kind. Thank you very much for taking the time. I appreciate it.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone. Bye bye.
Thanks a lot. Bye bye.